It's the cave, dude. Plato and how to reimagine spiritual community. Let's start with Plato's Allegory of the cave. I bet you've heard it. Here's how it goes. Bunch of people chained to chairs in the back of a dark cave. Behind them, there's a fire. In front of the fire, there are some puppeteers casting shadows on the wall in front of the prisoners. All they see is the shadow world on the wall in front of them. And over time, the shadows become very real to them. So real, they build their lives around these images, these illusions. Now, outside the cave, sure, there is sunlight, there is real life, but they don't know that. And even if they did, the light would hurt their eyes. It would collapse the reality that they live in. Consequently, those who even think of leaving get lots of pushback. Don't do it. Danger, foolishness, craziness. Consequently, in Plato's story, when people do go to the light, they do so kicking and screaming, dragged out against their will. Seeing the light happens slowly if it happens. In fits and starts if it happens. It takes a long time to see that the shadows never were real. Plato's Allegory of the cave. Now, in the last episode, we saw several social forces shaping our social and our relational dysfunction, unrooting us, fragmenting, polarizing, exhausting us. Well, for the rest of this series, how Plato's cave informs building communities with counter norms to those social forces. The cave is not just dusty philosophy. It's a story about us, about you and me, especially when we are trying to build a better way, which is what we are doing when we're working on spiritual communities. When we are finding it hard, even when we're doing all the right things, Plato's cave can help us. When we ourselves are in the cave, looking at our own shadow images, the story they usually tell us is that we're good people and that we have strong values. We're just being thwarted by the bad guys. That's usually the narrative that plays out up on the wall of illusion. But Plato says, nah, it's not that. That story and a bunch of others like it, shadows, not real. Plato isn't at all concerned with what we believe. He's focused on the question, is what we believe reality? And most likely he tells us, no, it's not. What it is, he says, is the cave. It's the cave, dude. So a story. A young spiritual leader that I meet with a few years ago left the tradition that he was part of. As happens, he could no longer find life in the old beliefs, the old practices, which takes courage. The old paradigm is powerful. It's been the paradigm for 500 years at least. And stepping out of it, well, that takes some audacity. Also, let's be honest, the old paradigm pays the bills a whole lot better than the not yet fully emerged new paradigm. But he did it. Started a new community, whole bunch of deconstructing, some reconstructing, finding new ways to be community. It's been great. The problem, people show up to this new community steeped in expectations. Some folks have old paradigm expectation. They want something better, but there's an invisible line. And if you cross it, suddenly, whoa, 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 buddy, you are not one of us anymore. Others show up with new, not yet fully formed paradigm expectations. Wait, you're still holding on to that old idea or that old practice? I thought better of you. Now, that matters because my friend carries those expectations inside of himself. He wants to build something new. He wants to keep folks together, moving towards something new. So it has been costly. Costly psychologically, costly emotionally. He's alienating everybody. He's pleasing nobody. Now, that's not an uncommon experience. But Plato is here to help. Look, he says, you're in a cave. You're not stupid. You're in a cave. You're not irrational. The people with expectations are not irrational. They're quite reasonable given what they see on the wall in front of them. But that's the problem, he says. What we see is not what is real. The more traditionalist expectations, the non-traditionalist expectations, based on different shadows, but living in the same captivity. So my friend's pain is not because he's failing, it's because he's disoriented. He himself has only partially turned away from the shadows. He himself carries expectations of himself, and he can feel the pull of their expectations. He's had a glimpse of light outside the cave. He has. But he's in this really hard place. The old vision no longer working, but the new vision not yet clear. So it is exhausting, and it's lonely. But it's not failure. That's what turning to the light looks like. All those pressing expectations, all those old illusions exerting their pull, being amplified by people who desperately need to protect the only reality that they know, that's what turning to the light looks like. And in that reality, all the old leadership tools that he learned, that we learned, persuasion, clarification, certitude, reassurance, those things just don't work. Not in the cave. You can't make someone see what they have not yet seen. Because, again, the problem is not intelligence. The problem is vision. So of course he's exhausted. He's trying to explain light to people staring at shadows. And he is just now starting to glimpse the light himself. So come on, Plato, help my friend out here. And sure enough, Plato tells my friend, buddy, it's not your job to drag anybody out of the cave. Persuasion is not your job. Perception, that's your job. Perception. You got to see before you can lead. And seeing is very different from convincing. Plato says to my friend, when you're turning from the shadow to the light, it will always be disorienting. There will always be loss and grief. There will always be a season in which you just don't function very well. And that's what growth looks like when you're coming out of the cave of illusion. Sure, it feels horrible, but it is growth. So, informed by Plato's cave then, let's imagine a few things that my friend could do, what we could do as leaders leading out of the cave. Here's what Plato's cave, that allegory, points us to. It points us to practices, not arguments, not strategies, practices. Here's one of them. Let go of what most of us learned about leading. Let go of correcting people, persuading people, directing people, because in Plato's cave, leadership is not that. Instead, it's this. Continually cultivate our own perception. Continually cultivate our own perception. Continually work on seeing differently ourselves, shifting our own attention, listening deeply ourselves, softening our own reactions, seeing patterns that we haven't seen. We start there. Because only after that will we have anything to say to anybody else about anything. Here's a second thing leaders can do leading out of the cave. We can ask ourselves and help others ask themselves, seeing differently kinds of questions. Like, where might I be mistaking familiarity for reality? Or, is my emotional response right now because my truth isn't true enough? Or, what ingrained, internalized certainty right now is feeling threatened? Now, it's hard to even call those things leadership strategies. They're more spiritual practices, more interior spiritual practices. Practices for seeing what we have not yet seen, discerning our own shadow worlds, and inviting others to do those practices with us. Well, here's the third thing. we can develop internal emotional regulation. Because leave the cave and emotions do happen. Fear and anger and shame and grief. Emotional regulation helps us manage those very normal experiences so that we can see them as signs that we are actually turning toward the light instead of seeing them as negative things. Emotional regulation will help us pause instead of push, name instead of react, stay present instead of doing, and the cave suggests that is an appropriate way we could lead. And here's another. We could just give up persuading anybody about anything. You know, that is pressure. That is tension. If we focus instead on seeing differently and quit trying to get anybody to do anything or go anywhere, if instead we simply practice together, we do that, urgency falls away, eyes open, we become more able to see, and we can do that. Organizing community around doing together what my friend is learning to do himself, the practices. Because seeing has to come before doing. Seeing has to come before doing. Okay, in the next episode, what happens after we start the turn? If you'd like to be notified when that goes live, you go ahead, subscribe.